So just by way of introduction, my name is Christian Lane. I'm the CEO and founder of Smarter. And I want to talk to you today a little bit more about how I started my company. So there's not that much detail. It's very basic compared to the detail that we've spoken about this morning, but it is slightly more controversial. And I think because I know most of you in this room, I will be delicate. But in essence, we are talking about how the industry will change and my opinion on that. So, just to get going here. Sorry, no one's told me how to use the clicker. Is that it? There we go, all right. So, just by way of introduction, people tell me that you should kind of give your CV as you start a pitch. So, I am an award-winning entrepreneur. We manage a team of 30 people based in London, and we run 8-figure revenues. So on the face of it, fairly successful, but my journey did not start out so. So back in 2008, about 10 years ago, I started my first company called Folio. So this was actually a stationery business, very different to what we're doing now in technology. But at the time, it felt like it was cutting edge. So essentially, the concept was to curve paper without creasing it. This would have been great if it was the 1980s. It was not. It was 2008. So when we launched, it seemed like we had roaring success. So I was a Dragon's Den winner at the age of 19. We were in about 1,000 stores worldwide. We managed to get it into WH Smith, Staples, Ryman's, and Office Depot. So at the age of 19, I genuinely felt like I'd made it, and I had the kind of world at my feet. I was also mentored by a leading expert of retail. So learned everything there is to know about retail, and then the retail crash happened, which we didn't really prepare for. So I learned all about the difference between product sell-in and products sell out. Everything sold in well. We had these people buying the stock, but it didn't move off the shelves. So we decided to move on to something different after this happened. So April 3rd, 2010, the iPad came out and we stopped using paper. Who would have thought that designers and artists would ever stop using paper? But Steve Jobs managed to make it happen, so it was a huge reality check for us. I'm about to show you an actual photograph of how I looked when we stopped using paper. So, who here can relate by way of hands to this image? I think if you can't, you genuinely haven't lived. Everybody should have experienced a situation like this. So this was me when my business failed. And as a naive boy, it was a huge reality check. So this was my bank balance after that happened. I went from having access to a lot of money to then having £90 in my bank. I've just blurred out the account details there because I know what you industry people are like. So we had to find something different, and essentially all I knew was retail, hardware. That's my interpretation of hardware. And I could see that there was a change towards mobile. So to put these together, it was actually known as the Internet of Things. I just didn't know it at the time. So I actually came up with a concept called the iKettle. This was about 5 years ago when we first started this, and essentially it was an idea to pre-boil your kettle so that you wouldn't have to get out of bed. Basically merging all of my kind of expertise into one, if you would call it that. So I did a little bit of a survey and asked various family members what they thought of my idea, and this was the kind of reaction I got. So honestly, don't bother. I think that came from my brother. Why on earth would you need that? And this sort of technology will be the death of society as we know it. So I think that one was specifically my mum. If only she could see me now. So I did it anyway because I was quite rebellious and I only had £90 to lose. So I took my last £100 and actually made a prototype. And I pitched this to various retailers, the ones that were still surviving, and I got my first order. So the first order was £5,000. So naturally, I felt completely rich again, and spent that £5,000 trying to make the product. I then raised an order for £250,000 after putting it on pre-order. Didn't expect it to go so well, but I took that pre-order momentum and sold it to a retailer and managed to raise an order for £2 million. So overnight, I'd gone from having not much money to having access to a lot of money again, and I thought things were going great. I was then introduced to this, which is the hardware roller coaster, which we probably all know. So you can imagine where I ended up, which was pretty much at rock bottom. So I ended up here after we actually had a cancellation of that £2 million order. So it genuinely seemed too good to be true, and it actually was. So the retailer that placed that order actually went bankrupt, and I ended up with nothing again. So we had £1 million worth of stock that we managed to shift. The other £1 million we couldn't actually find a home for. So this was all coming over from China, and at the very last minute, I needed a place to store this stock. Naturally phoned my mother-in-law and said, "Can you hold some stuff for me?" This is a picture of the truck arriving for the stuff. You can see here that she is not very happy about it. But it was a lot of stock, so it filled up her entire garden, and she wasn't happy, to say the least. So I just thought we'd spend some time analysing how unhappy she actually was. So you can just see from her face, this is kind of what she was going through. So I knew this technology stuff wasn't a good idea, and she was probably right. What happens if this doesn't work? And I just need to hold this brave face until it's all over. So this is actually how I think we as an industry are feeling. So this is a slightly controversial part of my pitch. I think we are here, essentially in denial about what is happening and how our industry is being revolutionised by technology. So we talk about this in a lot of detail, but there's not much action. And I think as an industry, we need to fast forward to integration and skip all of the horrible phases of fear, anger, guilt, and unhappiness. So we partnered with a company called Liebherr, and I know Liebherr in the audience, so I need to be very careful about what I say. But Liebherr are a very traditional manufacturer, and specifically a manufacturer for kitchen appliances and refrigeration. So we partnered with them so that we could essentially introduce new technology into their product line. And we introduced them to a book called Who Moved My Cheese. So Who Moved My Cheese is basically about two mice. One is the smarter mouse, pun intended, and the smarter mouse goes out to find new cheese every day. The lazy mouse actually goes back to the same spot where cheese was given to him, and eventually one day it's gone. So after reading this book, we, 6 weeks later, actually announced a partnership to connect over 1 million homes. Liebherr might tell the story slightly differently, so I'll let him do his pitch another time. But they were winning again on the innovation front. So this was all about moving beyond the fear of change. And we can see companies like Uber, Netflix, and Airbnb doing this. And it's important that we embrace this change and essentially look for relatable things that have happened to us. So probably 5 years ago, we had to go to a cash machine to check what our balance was. And now there'll be outrage if we can't see what the balance is directly on our phone. So this is a good example. NatWest were in trouble for actually having a server issue for about an hour, which resulted in people not being able to check their bank account. So this is how quickly an industry can move. So just to quote Albert Einstein, I think in terms of any intelligent fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. And I think simplifying is actually the key to our success. So just to look at how this changes in terms of the 4 industrial revolutions, We're actually in the intelligence part at the moment, and this consists of big data, robotics, and artificial intelligence. So it's actually about using this revolution to create a simpler form of execution. So what does AI really mean, for those of you that don't know? I'll give you a very basic high level. It's essentially two forms of approach. One is the rules and logic approach. So this is basically reasoning, using a set of rules, which is great for home automation and kind of processes. So essentially a calculator would use something like this. The other is machine learning, which is where it gets a little bit more interesting, which is the pattern-based approach. So this is algorithms finding patterns, and they use those patterns to form predictions so that you can make something smarter. So this is all powered by large numbers, essentially. So this is what allows us to get that data so that we can plug it back into our algorithms and then turn something into essentially being smarter. Amazon is the best example of that. I think they're the ones that have the most traction in the market at the moment. Over 44 million units sold so far really proves that they're getting momentum in turning that into a very powerful algorithm, and more specifically, a powerful retail platform. So this is the new retail, in my opinion, and here's why our specific model is broken. At the moment, if you consider FMCGs like Unilever, they need to deliver to a warehouse. That warehouse then needs to deliver to a retailer, in this case it could be somewhere like Tesco's, and then the consumer needs to drive to the retailer, do the shopping, and then put everything back into their traditional fridge. So this is actually causing over 40% of our food waste, just because when we put it into the fridge we don't actually know what we've got anymore, and it's the biggest driver of waste. As a result, people are now shopping little and often, and this is essentially why takeaway services like Deliver and Just Eat have become even more convenient than cooking. So we created a product called the Fridge Cam. The Fridge Cam reduces the need for any of this stuff by way of a new ecosystem. So we're actually at the beginning point of an ecosystem where data is driving the virtual assistants, like Amazon Alexa, and the delivery and the new form of entry will create a new system where people aren't wasting anymore. So the product criteria for us to begin was it needs to be reliable and easy to use. So this is where everybody starts, I think, in creating a new product and trying to drive change. It needed to be used in any fridge, and it needs to resemble a similar and familiar user experience. All of this would enable a new way of living, and more importantly, we had to make sure that the lifetime value of the product was greater than the cost of acquisition. So this is us when we first started trialing the product. This is actually a picture of the inside of my fridge. I don't like olives, I'm not sure why the olives are centre stage. But when we first started testing our algorithms, we could detect very basic things like oven chips, beer, champagne, so this was objects. And then as we progressed, we could detect a little bit more, and this was using forms of algorithms. So we could detect about 25% of the fridge in a logic-based approach. As we progressed and we used the power of numbers and more people were using the product, we could actually detect more things. So these were the things at the back of the fridge, and more unusual things using artificial intelligence. So we could get to about 80%. So in terms of those other things at the back, like mouldy mushrooms and the old leftovers that your mother-in-law gave you, we actually found that by using a fridge cam, people wasted less, they cooked more, and they lived leaner. So this is really what we were encouraging people to do. So just to summarise, it's actually convenience that I think powers retail. Sensors and the law of large numbers, which allows us to build essentially the most powerful replenishment platform. So we see the future as warehouse, delivery, and small fridge. So that's pretty much what I'm going to leave you with. I think as an industry, we probably need to check in on cheese a little bit more, and we could use with a fridge cam to kind of make that happen. Thank you very much.